What I'm about to show you keeps America's top generals awake at night. It's this small strip of land right on the border of Lithuania and Poland. This unassuming piece of land has been called the most dangerous place on earth, the weak spot in the West's armour. It's known as the Suwalki Gap. If Vladimir Putin wanted to strike at NATO, this is where many fear he would do it. The Suwalki Gap runs between Poland and Lithuania, surrounded by the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on one side and Belarus on the other, Russia's close ally currently fighting alongside Putin's forces in Ukraine. It's the only land route between NATO's most eastern countries, the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and the rest of the alliance. Some experts, like John Denny from the Atlantic Council, think the Suwalki Gap would be the perfect place to launch an attack.
One of the easiest ways to do that would be to cut across this border and close off the corridor between Belarus to the east and Kaliningrad to the west.
And what happens if they close off that corridor, that only land route through?
The Russians would essentially prohibit or prevent the NATO allies from flowing materiel, reinforcements up into the Baltic states to push out any Russian invaders.
To understand why that's even a possibility, we have to look at the two countries on either side of the gap. Kaliningrad is part of Russia, but it's surrounded by NATO members. And it's home to Russia's only port with access to the Baltic Sea that doesn't freeze in winter. So it's vitally important to Putin and his country's defence. But Russia hasn't always controlled this small piece of land in the middle of Europe. After the Red Army swept through Germany at the end of World War II, Russia took control of the region, then known as Königsberg. In 1945, at the end of the war, an agreement between the Allies meant the area was placed under the control of the Soviet Union. The USSR expelled almost the entire German population and replaced them with Russians and renamed it after one of their heroes from the 1917 revolution. And now Kaliningrad is one of Putin's military strongholds. It's home to one of their navy's largest fleets of warships. It's not known exactly how many Russian troops are actually stationed there, and it could range from 2,000 to 200,000. Kaliningrad also holds some of Russia's state-of-the-art nuclear-capable Iskander missiles, which could strike deep into NATO territory.
It's arguably the most militarized space in Europe, outside of the war zone in Ukraine.
On the other side of the Suwalki Gap is Belarus. The country's leader, Alexander Lukashenko, has been called Europe's last dictator, and he's one of Putin's closest allies. Belarus was one of the launch pads for Russia's war in Ukraine, as thousands of troops and tanks massed there in the run-up to the invasion. Belarusian territory has been used to launch missiles and attacks into Ukraine. Putin and Lukashenko have even signed a pact to become a union state, integrating their economies, militaries, and their industries.
Belarus has essentially undergone a soft annexation on the part or by Russia. Previously, Russians would show up in Belarusian territory for periodic but short-term exercises. That has now been replaced by a permanent Russian military presence in Belarus.
The threat of a larger war with Russia is growing. Putin's increased concerns in the West about what comes next, with annexation, mobilization, and frequent references to nuclear weapons. And following an attack on a key bridge in Crimea, Russia launched airstrikes against Ukrainian cities in retaliation. Many of the strikes hit civilian areas with no strategic importance. And like Ukraine, the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were all former members of the Soviet Union. In speeches, Putin continues to mythologize Russia's history, to justify the invasion of Ukraine, and to cast himself as a liberator.
Нет ничего сильнее решимости этих людей вернуться в свое подлинное историческое отечество.
But unlike Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are all members of NATO. And a founding principle of that alliance is Article 5. So if Russia did invade a NATO state, it would be an attack on all 30 members.
We will defend and protect every inch of NATO territory.
Mr. Putin, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Every inch.
As many of Ukraine's weapons are supplied by NATO, Putin could choose to interpret that as an attack by the alliance.
Мы будем защищать нашу землю всеми имеющимися у нас силами и средствами.
So NATO is preparing for conflict and reinforcing Eastern Europe. They're doubling their troops in the area and they're holding regular drills. And now Finland and Sweden are in the process of joining the alliance. If that happens, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia wouldn't be as isolated from the rest of NATO. as the newest members will be able to reach them by sea and by air. Which brings us back to the Suwalki Gap, because this small stretch is still the only land route to Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. And with Finland and Sweden increasing NATO's presence in the Baltic Sea, Russia really needs this path to Kaliningrad. And while his military continues to suffer huge losses in Ukraine, Putin's actions suggest that taking back former Soviet territories remains his ultimate ambition.
We expect Russia to be an enduring challenge and, frankly, an enduring threat, especially to the Baltic states and the NATO allies of Eastern Europe.